The Cuban Missile Crisis. In the perspective of Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro was the political leader of Cuba, who served as Prime Minister from 1959 until 1976. He revolutionized Latin America with his decision to transform Cuba into a communist nation, which was the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba in relation to the USSR and the USA. Cuba is a small island off the coast of Miami, Florida, USA. It's approximately 368 kilometers from Havana, the capital of Cuba, to Miami, Florida. Havana is 9,598 kilometers from Moscow, Russia. Before the Cuban Revolution in 1959, the US and Cuba had maintained a strong relationship since the end of the Spanish-American War in 1898. The Spanish were defeated by America and were given Puerto Rico and Cuba by Spain. The United States gave Cuba independence from Spain, and for over 50 years both Cuba and the United States assisted each other both economically and politically, both countries using one another's resources to help their own country. The period after World War II was called the Cold War. This war was against the USA and the USSR. During this so-called war between the Soviet Union and the United States, the country's armed forces never directly met or fought the battlefield, although both superpowers threatened each other in the form of nuclear annihilation and so-called proxy wars, which involved supporting allied nations from each opposer. The Cold War was a battle between ideologies and civilizations, clashing between American capitalism and Soviet communism. This was also known as arms race.
Arms race. An arms race is a competition between two or more parties to have the most superior armed forces. Each party is aiming to obtain and produce the largest amount of weapons, armies, military and space technology, which leads to a development in technology.
The objective of the Cold War was to gain dominance by exploiting all opportunities for expansion. Therefore, the US and the USSR never came into direct confrontation and never directly fought, especially with nuclear weapons, meaning it was a Cold War. Measures that were taken to avoid nuclear war include the Agreement of Prevention of Nuclear War. This agreement was established to reduce the danger of a nuclear war outbreak between the United States and the Soviet Union, signed on June 22, 1973 in Washington, D.C. Both parties agreed to a policy which restrained hostility. The agreement consisted of 8 separate articles which explained that there were to be no use of nuclear weapons, and if either party escalate and involve in any form of nuclear apparatus, they had to immediately resolve the issue by any means necessary. Second was the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The NPT 1968, enforced in 1970, is an international treaty which aimed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. These agreements were an act and guide of replenishing and restoring world peace and gaining international security. They promoted international cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and technology. Influences in the media during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The media had great influence on the Cuban Missile Crisis. The invention of the television in 1920 allowed for information to be spread and accessed much more easily and efficiently. Multiple press conferences and speeches by President Kennedy and Fidel Castro were broadcast using the television. Documentaries and news coverage provided people with first-hand news and pictures capturing events during the crisis. As more people had access to television during this time period in America and Cuba, it was the first time many people had seen such warlike events unfolding in front of them. Propaganda also played a major role during the crisis, with the Cuban government scaring people with the idea of a capitalist government. They showed pictures that claimed to be from America, showing people living in horrible conditions and the government being in debt. Different perspectives during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fidel Castro.
The Cuban government wanted the USSR missiles because they thought the missiles would keep them safe from an invasion from the US, who are approximately 780 kilometers from their shores. The USSR and their nuclear missiles were able to protect Cuba from the US, who pose a great threat to the Cubans' freedom.
The USSR.
Cuban government, being a communist party, also supported the USSR and their beliefs that the world should become a communist nation. Due to the US having nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, the USSR felt threatened, so decided that to protect themselves, missiles could be put in Cuba to stop any further advances on the Soviet Union. Because the Soviet Union wanted to spread their beliefs in communism, Cuba was the perfect candidate. Cuba, who had recently become a communist country in 1959, was perfect for the Soviet Union to influence the Cuban government and leaders at the same time as protecting themselves and Cuba.
The USA.
As a result of all three countries being afraid of each other, the Americans were afraid of the Soviet Union firing missiles and starting a nuclear war, and the Cubans and the Soviet Union were afraid of the Americans invading their countries.
The resolution of this event resulted in both parties removing all nuclear weaponry. The US President John F. Kennedy and the USSR President Nikita Khrushchev reached an agreement that they would both eliminate all nuclear weaponry, therefore resulting in the removal of missiles from Turkey and Cuba. Cuba also benefited from this as they were reassured that America would never invade them in the future. This would have imposed a sense of relief on the country, especially Fidel Castro, as he no longer had to deal with the continuous threat of invasion and ensured a sense of safety for future generations. Thank you for watching our presentation. We hope you enjoyed it.